Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Valspar Championship. Gonna go through the Innisbrook Copperhead Course, all the details that you need for your research to get you ready to go after some of your outright bets, maybe some of your DFS plays out there as well, including some tournament details, a whole breakdown of this track, all the shots required around this kind of venue, as well as my custom modeling, key stats, and comp courses to help you identify some of your top plays. So by the end, you'll be a complete expert on what to expect this week, so let's not waste any time at all and go ahead and hop on in. The Copperhead course has always been a pretty tricky design, but over the last year or so, it's got even harder with some of the changes. So we'll go ahead and start off right there, where the rough has been a lot beefier the last 2 years. It's listed at about 3.75 inches. And I can tell you from being on site the last 2 years, it was closer to 4 inches by the time we got to Thursday, and they didn't cut it at all. It got to about 5, even 5.5 inches when it was a little bit softer a few years ago, which makes this place go from about an even par scoring average, sometimes just a little bit over par, to a well over par scoring average the last few years. And what you can see down here in this notable tab is that they still have that change listed over here in this column over here. In fact, right about here where I have it highlighted, but they also are adding some length over there to hole number 9. They're adding about 15 yards by playing from 11T, which is going to make that hole a lot more difficult, mostly because you can't take it over the bunkers that are there, and it's going to put a lot more premium on that accuracy. But that is just one hole where you're really going to see that difference. The main change is what we've already seen the last 2 seasons, and what you've seen is a shift from off the tee distance being a huge asset here to a lot of players looking for accuracy. With how beefy that rough is, it's kind of similar to what we had at TPC Sawgrass. If you hit it in there, you have no chance to hit these small greens, and just like you had at TPC Sawgrass, not very large greens, in fact just under 6,000 square foot, which I would definitely classify towards the smaller end of the spectrum. And though it'll be a little bit softer here for this year's Valspar, they got about 2.5 inches of rain with that front that came through Florida. It's going to dry up as the week goes on, and by Saturday, Sunday, I think it's playing well over par like last year. Now, Thursday, Friday could be a little bit of better scoring conditions if the winds stay down, but I think we'll get a little bit of chaos and carnage out there towards the weekend. A few other things to go through. We've got ryegrass overseed for most of the rough and fairways, and then we got the same Poa trivilis overseed on the greens. So the same type of grass we've had for the last few events, which is almost always going to be the case down here with the Florida setup. It's a par 71, but it's worth noting it is a strange par 71. It has 5 par 3s in play and then also 4 par 5s. So not what we usually see out there for a par 71, which is always worth noting. And though it is 7,300 yards, almost 7,400 yards, it plays longer than that because of the fact that it has 5 par 3s. It's effectively closer to like almost a 74, even a 7,500 yard golf course. You've also got quite a few bunkers in play around this track, and though it's not as prevalent as what you've had the last few Florida tracks, you still have water in play of 9 of the 18 holes. So it's a factor like you usually get down here in the Sunshine State, and you'll see that with the scoring. So we go over here to some of the averages over the last 3 seasons. You'll see that the fairway rate is harder than your PGA Tour average. Your green rate about 7%, sometimes 6% lower than your PGA Tour average. Scrambling rate actually a little bit higher than what you're used to seeing, so it hasn't been that difficult to get out of that rough. And also 3 putts, right? The greens aren't all that difficult, but from the ball striking perspective, it's harder than you usually get out here on tour. So that's why the birdie average is a little bit lower than what we're used to seeing. It's why your bogey average is also a little bit higher than what you're used to seeing. When you get on the greens, a lot of players tend to find success around here, but getting to that greenside or on the complexes can really be that difficult part. So last year you had Peter Malnati go out there and win. We of course had the Cameron Young outright over here on the channel, so that one was a little bit of a heartbreaker there towards the end. But when you have a surprise winner like Peter Malnati, right, that shows you how wide open this golf tournament can be. And Xander is also playing this year, which I know he's still in a little bit of a rusty form, but could be a good spot for him. He finished T5 last year. The year before that's when Taylor Moore went out there and won as well. But not really the strongest leaderboards that we're used to seeing. But it's worth noting that here in 2025, it is a little bit of a stronger field strength that we have. So maybe we see a few more big names up there towards the top. In terms of the driver's paradise, you would not say that about the Innisbrook Copperhead course, especially after they changed the setup. With that longer rough, a lot less plus drivers are coming out of players' bags. And then out of the 15 holes where you can hit driver around here, they only have 8 of them listed as true driver holes. And there are a few forced layups, right, that lean into that a little bit more, but not the kind of golf course where you're really going to overpower it with that distance. Your approach distribution is relatively balanced, I would say, but the main thing to note here is that you have hardly any shots coming from 50 to 125. You know, maybe a few over there on the par 5s if you lay up, but mostly mid to long irons that you have around this golf course. The around the green distribution, because they added that rough around the green, you're going to have a lot of shots that are only coming from a few paces off of these green complexes. And then you're putting, as I said, a little bit easier than what you have at most courses. So this isn't really the sort of track where you see a lot of separation over there on the greens. You know, if we go back to some of these winners, sure, you're going to gain strokes putting if you win a golf tournament, but you had guys losing or about neutral up there towards the top as well. I mean, a Cam Young wasn't all that impressive on the greens and he finished in second, right? Ryan Moore finished in T5, yet losing strokes putting. You go to that back to the year before that, right? A lot of dark green with your winners, as you're always going to see, right, out there in the PGA Tour, but you have guys losing up there in the top 10 as well, right? Close to neutral players like a Wyndham Clark, they were also able to finish top 5. It's much more about separating yourself in the ball striking categories than going out there and doing it with the short game. And what you will see for most of the guys over here on the left is a lot of dark green in those 2 ball striking categories. And of course, last year that holds up except for Mackenzie Hughes, who I guess is the one outlier, the right one unicorn that we have throughout this whole sample size, where it was the short game that was carrying him that year. And now for a quick hole-by-hole analysis. So the first thing we're going to see here is the starting par 5, which plays extremely downhill, and depending on your length off the tee, I mean, some players might be trying to get it towards this corner. So I'm going to go ahead and set the first target a little bit closer to this right bunker, just because most players are going to be more aggressive about it. And though you do have to hit the fairway to go for this in 2, the deep rough is going to keep players from trying to reach this in with their second shot. It's only about 230 yards in. It's a lot flatter than what you have with the first shot. First shot plays severely downhill, but it is reachable for pretty much everyone if they hit that fairway. Hole 2's 415. It does dogleg from right to left. The water doesn't seem like it's in play down the right, but you'd be surprised with how many water balls you'll see down there. With firm and fast conditions, balls can hit the fairway and end up in that water. The approach shot, which is a little bit uphill for the second, can be a little bit tricky at times. Hole 3 is 450. You have the water down the right here, and even people that'll miss OB down the left. So this is an extremely difficult tee shot, and I think a perfect example of where you can see the accuracy coming into play. You know, very narrow landing areas and a big penalty, right, for missing in either direction. It'll be, especially in windy days, one of the hardest holes out here. Hole 4 is 187 yards, so the first of the 5 par 3s. Relatively narrow green complex, but I wouldn't say it's one of the trickier holes out here. About average difficulty there at 4. It plays a little downwind, I believe, at least from the back tee box it does. Hole number 5, down elevation, I should say. Hole 5 plays way uphill over here at this par 5. It plays 610, but probably closer to 625, 630 if you incorporate for the elevation change out there from tee up to the green. It has a little bit of a valley effect, right? You go from tee box down to the fairway and then way up there towards the green. And mostly a 3-shotter for these players. Hole 6 is 454. This is a medium length par 4, a little bit of a dogleg from left to right, and it does play severely downhill for both shots. So it's going to take off a little bit of distance over there with your yardages, but another small green that's tough to hit. Hole 7 plays back up the hill. It is only about 420 yards though, so it's still a very scoreable look. You just have to hit the fairway here. Some players will take less than driver to go out there and do so, because if you miss left, you're absolutely dead. You're blocked out, most likely chipping out and trying to get up for a third. And if you miss right, this rough is also pretty penal, and the trees, though they look pretty sporadic, are well placed over there on that right side. Hole 8's your second par 3. This is one of the harder holes out here. It's over 200 if they play it from the back. I will say, though, that in windy conditions that they'll move up the tee box at times there. If they don't, it'll be in the top 3 most difficult holes. Hole 9 is 420. This is where the change is this year. So I know we mentioned that they're playing from the other tee box, and that's going to be, it's actually set the tee position back here, back over here at this hole. So it makes the tee shot a lot harder to hit it past these bunkers, especially because it plays a little bit uphill. So if we set target 1 a little bit closer, a little bit more realistic for these players, you'll see that the left and right miss is going to take you into these bunkers now, which of course makes that second shot a whole lot more difficult because it plays severely up to that green there. Hole 10, so if you're starting on the back, is not a par 5 like what you had at hole number 1. And this one plays way downhill as well, as you'd guess, going back the other direction. And this is a scoreable hole, I would say, depending on pin location, but a back right pin can be a little tricky. 11 is your first par 5 on the back. This is the shortest par 5, I believe, that we have at the golf course. Hole 1 is still reachable. This one will be as well. You can see here that you do have a lot of bunkering protecting this green, but one where most players have it around the complex in 2 and are trying to get up and down for a birdie. Hole 12 is 375. This is one of the forced layups that you have around this golf course. And yeah, not a whole lot of people that are going to hit it in the water off the tee here, just because you take a club where you can't reach it in most cases. But it is a difficult hole because it leaves you 150, 160 yards in, maybe longer if you lay up a little bit further back off the tee, which some players will do, right? They'll take iron off the tee and leave themselves like 170, 180, which makes it a really hard shot into this green because of how small it is. 13 is another par 3. By the way, over here to the right is where the Hooters 10 is, which if I end up going on Saturday, Sunday is probably where I'll be. They've got free beer and wings in there, so why not? Sounds like golf heaven to me. And this hole's a lot of fun to watch. You've got the water down the right. It's a lot more in play than you'd think as well, because everything slopes from the green down to it. So if you hit it short, and especially if it's a drier day when it's not going to plug, there's a good chance that you end up in the water if you don't hit the green there. 14 is your next par 5. This one is 590 yards. It is a hard one to reach into unless it's playing directly downwind. So kind of like you had with the other par 5 on this side, or I should say on the front side that played uphill, it can be a 3-shotter for most players. Like unless it's the perfect wind direction, even your longest guys are going to struggle to get there. Hole 15 is 208 yards. It does play downhill here at this par 3. This is a trickier par 3, but you've got a large enough green here where it's not impossible. 16, though, is the start of the snake, the snake trap you have over here. This is just ridiculously difficult. You've got the water down the right, the deep rough down the left. If you hit it in the trees, it's a chip out pretty much no matter what. And if you want to lay back off the tee here, you can. It leaves you to a slightly wider part of the fairway, but then it leaves your much longer second shot in. And because it's such a narrow green complex here, you know, if you're hitting a long iron in, good luck trying to get it to stop, especially as the course starts to firm up. And then you got 17 here, which is 212 yards. This is also a pretty difficult par 3. It does play slightly uphill as well, not massively, but still adds a little bit of difficulty from the visual perspective. And finally, 18 also plays back up that same hill, and this is maybe the most difficult hole that we have at this golf course, right? You've got the bunkers in play. They don't need to move back the tee box to keep them in play for these tour pros, and because it's a little bit of a blind shot with the elevation change, and that's part of the beauty of this golf course. Like most Florida tracks don't have elevation change. You get that over here at Innisbrook. It just adds a different dynamic that these players aren't really used to. Now that we've gone through the golf course, let's go through some of my key stats and modeling for this week to help you guys identify your top plays. And the best place to start when trying to figure out our custom modeling is over here with the BTN model from last year. So they have it from 2024, and this, of course, is for the field this year, so we can go out and get an idea for maybe who sets up well compared to what they were looking at last, which, based on conditions, based on the rain that they've gone, should pretty much be spot in line with what they're doing here in 2025. So first and foremost, with shots gained off the tee, just looking at the best players in terms of accuracy and distance. And while this is more of an accuracy course than a distance course, if you have that elite tier combination, right, if you can hit fairways and you're hitting it a long way, that is always going to be an advantage, right? Having wedge or having shorter clubs into greens is only going to help players when it comes to their approach play. There's some of your best players on approach lately, and just to confirm that, it is over the last 24 measured rounds that they're looking at, would be Luke Clanton, number 1, shout out Florida State, somebody that I'm definitely going to have to keep an eye on in terms of his odds. You got Rico Hoey, Stephen Fisk, Kevin Yu up there towards the top. Nicholas Norgard-Moeller, one of the longest players that we have in the entire world. Kurt Kitayama as well, and also Aldrich Potgieter, all grading out very well in that category. Now, what I'll say about guys like a Potgieter, right, is that the, accuracy might be a little bit of an issue with those sort of guys. Like there are a few other guys on here like Kevin Yu that maybe aren't the most accurate, but if you can find somebody that's at least average, maybe even ideally above average out there with their accuracy, then you could be really cooking out there. And as you can see, we're going to get to fairway percentage here in a little bit. Also looking at regular approach play, this will be over the last 24 rounds as well. And Justin Thomas leading the way there. You've got Højgaard down there in second, Henrik Norlander, Sepp Straka, Joel Damon rounding rounding out the top 5, but approach play, always going to be a cornerstone of my analysis. It is the most consistent stat that we have from week to week, and the kind of thing that players can sustain for months at a time sometimes. So all these guys from, let's say, like Michael Kim, Putnam, Lowry, and up are all going to get a sizable bump out there in my modeling. And, you know, some of them also check some of the other boxes that we're looking for, but approach play, if you're really going to hunker down on one key stat for any given week, approach play is the way to go just because of how consistent it is, right? You know, off the tee play, especially the short game stats like around the green and putting, have a lot more variance to them. Around the green is something that you can't ignore here, but, you know, it's never going to be the most important stat that you're looking at for any given week. The reason why I say that is because if you're focusing on, you know, what happens when players are missing greens, and I think a lot of times you're focusing on the wrong aspect of golf, right? To get towards the top end of the leaderboard here, it's almost always the ball strikers that are getting the job done. So, you know, shots gained like the off the tee and approach, a little bit more important out there in my modeling. You've also got the putting over here as well. Can't completely ignore that. We're also going to take a look at some overseeded putting stats this week over there in my personal model, but taking a look at just some of the best putters in the field recently, which I want to double check this and see if it's overseeded. Actually, it does look like it's filtered to overseeded putting. So they already have the overseeded on here, over here in the model. So this is perfect, exactly what we're looking for. You've got Dietrich towards the top, Rasmus putting really well on this type of grass, Christian Bezainhout, Xander Schauffele, who, you know, coincidentally has some really good course history here. Also a top 5 last year and a T12 2 years before that. But guys like Kuchar, Bridgman, Adam Scott, Ben Griffin, all going to get a little bit of a boost when it comes to the putting. Now, just like the other short game category around the green, it's not as important as the ball striking stats, so I would much rather see the start green for these players over there in the ball striking categories. Now everyone's going to grade out that well. If you can find the combination, right, of this overseeded putting and then a little bit of ball striking, then that's where you can really find some of your plays. And, you know, kind of looking through the top end of this list, you know, Xander kind of sticks out. He's always going to as a top 3 player in the world. But guys like Adam Scott, you know, sneaky good ball striking, seems to be putting really well in this overseed. Go down a little bit further, guys like Jake Knapp even ball striking it pretty well, and then gaining over here on these overseeded greens are guys that you might want to look to as a little bit of a sleeper play this week, depending on the price and the ownership that you can get, of course. Fairway accuracy is also going to come into play, right? Keeping the ball in play with rough as long as what you have this week. You can see a lot of the top end finishers there. A few that kind of stand out, I guess a Lucas Glover, a Max McGreevy with how well he's been hitting the ball lately. Not the best overseeding putting over there in either player, but checking a lot of these other boxes that we were looking for. Guys like Kevin Kisner, probably a no play, right? Considering what he's been doing lately. But guys like CT Pan maybe stick out a little bit. His ball striking hasn't been too shabby lately. Andrew Putnam's also been hitting the ball well in approach, on top of being one of the most accurate drivers lately. And, you know, Carson Young over here, towards the end of last year, was really hitting his irons well, has kind of gotten away from him the last month or so out there on tour, but he putts well on these overseeded greens. He hits a lot of fairways, has always done that out there on tour. Get back to ball striking it like he was towards the end of 2024, and he could be a really good option this week too. But, you know, fairway accuracy, I'd say more than that driving distance is what I'm looking for in players. They're looking at green and regulation percentage as well. So another way to try and find some of those approach play poppers, what I'll say is that green and regulation percentage is a little bit hard to use in your modeling just because it's not used on a relative basis, right? That's why we use the shots gained approach, because it's always compared to the average field and how they played that day. Green and regulation percentage, right, is completely irrespective of golf course, right? It's not green regulation percentage gained out there to the field. So probably something I personally won't use in my modeling this week, but, you know, BTN just trying to round it out with some extra data there. You've also got this approach from 150 to 225, right? Going back to the course page before, there was like hardly any shots from 50 to 125. So I like that they're going out there focusing on the shots that we're going to see a little bit more often. And then they're also looking at some of the putting from 4 to 10 feet, which is the proximity range that you can kind of separate yourself from over here at this golf course. And just another way to look at some of those putting stats. So some of your top finishers there would be like a Quade Cummins, Nikolai Højgaard, Sam Burns, who, by the way, has a really good track record here. He went back-to-back 3 and 4 years ago. Christian Bezainhout, also just putting well on that surface lately. All players there in the top 5. And if you put it all together, take a look at the model rankings for the week. Number 1, Tommy Fleetwood. And Tommy, also a pretty good track record around here. Top 3 there a few years ago. Sepp Straka continuing to play fantastic golf. He had the top 20 finish over there at the Players Championship. Not the best course history, but he does set up well with that driving accuracy being a little bit of a focus. Also a good putter on that overseed. I've got to say that of all these players at the top, Sep's probably my favorite outright, and I've already bet him a few times this year, so I might not be afraid to go back to the well on him, even if he's like 25, 30 to 1. We'll have to see. Guys like Højgaard, maybe a little bit surprising to see on this list just because he's not the most accurate driver, but he's really grading out well in some of these other categories. You see that 150 to 225 range is dark green, regular approach play as well. Xander Schauffele, even with the rust, is still up there. Now, some of the stats being pulled for that are from before his injury, so just, tread with a little bit of caution, though, a little bit of an asterisk, I'd say, over there with his Xander Schauffele. McGreevy, with his form, he's definitely somebody I'm going to have to keep an eye on. I didn't really think he fit the Players' Championship well, and he went out there and was in the top 10 for quite some time. And then Michael Kim, after his missed cut at the Players, maybe a little bit of a bounce back spot, right? He's been putting decently over here on these overseeded greens, hitting a bunch of fairways, hitting a bunch of greens out there as well. Another player that I'm going to have to keep an eye on in my process. And now for our comp courses, where I've got 3 out there to use for a little bit of leaderboard crossover. So first up is going to be the Memorial Tournament, which unfortunately does have a stronger field than what we see here. So a lot of the players that are teeing it up won't be in this sort of field. But for some of those lower tier guys, I think it's a really good crossover. Adam Hadwin's a former winner at this event. He finished in 3rd at the Memorial this year. Guys like Christian Bezainhout, right? We saw him all over our custom modeling. So, I think that, with that top 4 finish at the Memorial is only a good sign of things to come this week. Sepp Straka, I know we mentioned him a few times. There's Xander Schauffele showing up again. But we go to the year before that, guys like Denny McCarthy, they're the exact kind of players that we play around this track. And Andrew Putnam was towards the top of the modeling as well. You can see him there at T5. And Matty Fitz, he also has a pretty good track record around here. And look at that, right? Adam Schenk, near winner out there 2 years ago, up there in the top 7 at the Memorial. So the reason why I like it for a comp is you've got that deep ryegrass rough, and accuracy being the real thing you're looking for off the tee. And the Memorial is a lot harder than what you're going to get at the Copperhead course, but with some of the changes over the last few years, it's starting to play a lot more like Muirfield Village. So, if we get a firm and fast Valspar, it might play as difficult as what we get at Jack's Place. Also looking at TPC Southwind, which is a little bit shorter than what you have here, but definitely a course where it's more about the accuracy than the distance off the tee. And it's the course with the most water balls of any on tour. Now, Valspar gets its fair share of water balls too, even with only water in play on 9 of the 18 holes. It won't be on the same level as, let's say, a Cognizant Classic, Players, or over there at TPC Southwind, but it's Florida style golf, even though it's up there in Memphis, over there with the St. G Championship, and a lot of the same kind of stats that you see over here in these categories. Like, scrambling's not that hard. You don't see a whole lot of 3-putts, but the ball striking stats are harder than what we're used to seeing. So from that perspective, I think a lot of good that you can take from looking at that leaderboard. And then the last one that we have over here is the Wyndham Championship, which is another shorter kind of track, but it's not really the length that we're leaning into here. It's the skill set, right? You've got to hit fairways around Sedgefield. It has the highest missed fairway penalty of any non-major, right? So obviously US Open, PGA Championships, missed fairway penalty is going to be through the roof at those sort of golf courses. Outside of those, it's the Wyndham Championship, which I don't think anyone would have really guessed without looking at the data. And if you take a look at these top-end finishers, right, it's your accuracy, more plotters off the tee that play well at these Florida-style tracks, right? I mean, it's in North Carolina, so it's far from down here in Florida, but, Luke Clanton played extremely well at the Cognizant this year. You have Ekra, who won at the Cognizant, Eric Cole, right, who's shown up at that event. I mean, Ben Griffin's been in contention how many times down here? Same thing with guys like Billy Horschel. Like, it's a who's who of guys that have played well in Florida golf. So it's just that same sort of style where you've got to hit your irons well to those small contoured greens. And if you miss off the tee, you're going to be penalized as well. So looking at the year before that, you had Billy Ho showing up again. There's Michael Kim, who I really think could be a good bounce back candidate this week, especially after missing the cut as Mega Chalk over there at the Players. Got guys like Benny Ann up there in the top, Lucas Glover, of course, who also won over there at TPC Southwind. All players maybe worth a little bit of extra consideration. Alrighty guys, so that is all I've got for this week's course preview. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. We'll be potentially going to the practice round on Wednesday, so I gotta let you guys know if I end up getting some of that boots on the ground info, and then if we have a little bit of a sweat going over there in DFS or for outrights, I may go out there for Saturday, Sunday as well. But Thursday, Friday out of the books. I've got to stay home with some of my pets, right? Give them some extra love this week after being away for almost an entire week. I just feel too bad, right? Can't stay away for 2 straight weeks. That wouldn't be right for them. But hey, if I could sneak out there for the weekend, could be a fun time to be had. But until then, best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to this week. week. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page, which is of course where I'm posting all my projections, all the different bets and props that I'm going out there and playing for each event, make sure to go ahead and give me your winning score for this week. If you guys can get the exact winning score, you will win a free month on my Patreon page, which I know last week we did have somebody who ended up winning that contest. So if you were that person that ended up getting -12 right, make sure to hit me up on Twitter/X and I'll get you hooked up out there for the contest. But go ahead, give me your best guess down below, and it'll be on a first come first serve basis, right? So once a score is taken once, it cannot be taken again. So early bird gets the worm. Go ahead, claim your score if you haven't already. That's all I've got. Best of luck as I mentioned, and I'll see you guys for the betting and DFS preview dropping on a little bit later on tonight.